So that's the floor, that's the state foundation. What's built on top of that? Well, if I think about my parents' generation, they're both in their 80s, they both have occupational pensions, a pension from the firm where they used to work. And bigger employers, better paid people on the whole, had really pretty good, pretty guaranteed pensions, really good stuff. And over the years, if I splashed out on an expensive PowerPoint presentation for you, it would look like that, and that's simply the proportion of people in work with a pension. And for decades and decades, roughly the year I was born, it started going wrong. I think that's coincidence, but broadly, since the mid-1960s, the proportion of people with a pension has been going down and down and down and down, and that's a problem, because all of these people in work are going to stop work one day, and they don't want to live on £8,000 a year from the state pension. So they need another pension, and companies were finding it more and more expensive to provide these pensions, so they were stopping doing it. And this left a huge gap. So in 2012, we did something very dramatic, which was introduced automatic enrolment, which said rather than wait for the person to opt in to saving in a pension, they have to opt out. Now, you'd think, logically, rationally, that's the same thing, isn't it? Do I want a pension, yes or no? If I want one, I'll opt in. If I don't, I won't. So why would opting in or opting out make a blind bit of difference? But the research evidence, what they call behavioural economics these days, says it makes a massive difference whether you start from a position of being in and have to actively opt out, or out and have to actively opt in. And in the last 5 years, nearly 10 million people have been put in a pension who weren't in a pension before. So they were put in a pension, and the government, of which I was a part, thought that about 1 in 3 would opt out, would say, oh, no, I can't afford it, or it's too far away, or I've got, whatever. It ended up being 1 in 10 who opted out. So 9 out of 10 have stayed in, and that's fantastic. So this automatic enrolment, which has just finished the first phase of getting everybody in, is regarded around the world as a success. There's almost nothing the British government ever does that people from other countries come and look and say, how did you do it? They'd sometimes come and look and say, well, we won't do that. But on this occasion, people from around the world come and say, how on earth did you do this auto-enrolment thing? If I give you an example, I went over to Ireland when I was still the minister, discussing with them, they'd like to do auto-enrolment, and it's about 2013 or something, and they said to me, Steve, it's not the right time. It's 2018. It's still not the right time. It never is. But you just have to start. So the good news is, again for our colleagues in sixth forms, when you start a job, as long as you're earning $10,000 a year or more, you will be put in a pension. You won't have to know what it is. You won't have to make any choices. It will be done for you. You'll put a bit of money in. Your employer will put a bit of money in. The government put a bit of money in. And then unless you actively choose to stop that happening, you start having a bit of money for later life. So that's great. But the catch. There's always a catch, isn't there? At the moment, the amounts going in are teeny-weeny. The price for getting it going and getting it started was to phase in these contributions really, really slowly. So until 6th of April this year, it was 1% of your pay from the worker, 1% from the firm. It's now 3% from the worker, 2% from the firm, and next year it will be 5% from the worker, 3% for the firm. That's a fantastic start, but it ain't enough. I know a number of you are doing A-level maths. If you're putting 8% of your salary into a pension, it's not going to replace 100% of your pay when you retire, is it? Even with the wonders of compound interest. So people are going to have to put a lot more than 8% in. But how are we going to make that happen? Because nobody wants to think about themselves old. We did some market research at Royal London a little while ago, and I'm going to say a word or two about care, and I know Louise is going to talk about care in a moment. And we were talking about products for when people can't look after themselves. And the people in our focus group said, please don't show us leaflets with pictures of people with wrinkly hands. People don't want to think about it. So the thing about pensions is it's really hard, until people are actually quite close to retiring, it's really hard to get people to engage. So how are we going to get people who aren't really engaged or interested to get from 8% to a more realistic level? And what I think we do is do something they've done in America. They call it SMART, Save More Tomorrow. And they do an experiment. They say to you, would you be willing to make a sacrifice now? And everybody says no. And then they say, would you be willing to commit today to make a sacrifice tomorrow? And most people say yes. They're willing to commit today to be virtuous tomorrow. So you can have the cake now, as long as you eat the piece of fruit tomorrow. I say that as a cake lover. That's my example. You may have others. So how does that work in pensions? So what we have to do is say to people, when you get a pay rise, so commit now that when you get a pay rise, so you've got a bit more money, pre-commit that some of that pay rise goes into upping your contributions into your pension. Because the least painful time to put money in a pension is when you've never had it, when you haven't got used to spending it. So just as at the point of the pay rise, put a bit more in, a bit more in, a bit more in, unless you opt out. And that will get us from 8% to the right sort of number, 15, whatever we think the right percentage is. Something like that will have to happen. Now, the government, I realise I'm on video here, are a bunch of wimps. Okay? Because we know we're going to get to 8% in 2019. The government has no plans to do anything beyond 2019. It's just going to stop at 8%. And if that's all it does, and successive governments leave it there, then people are not going to be able to afford to stop work. And that's bad news for everybody, isn't it? If you're an employer, you don't want people who are coming in every morning bitter, who really don't want to be there, who are unproductive, who are angry. You want them to be able to retire, they want to be able to retire, but they haven't got enough pension pot. And if I were to try and communicate one message that I believe passionately about pensions, is too much of what we say about pensions is about telling people off, making them feel bad, making them feel guilty. When they've got a nice cup of coffee in their hand, we snatch it out and say, why are you spending money on that instead of on your pension? And that's not what pensions are about. Pensions surely are about choices. They're about giving you a choice about when you stop work, about the quality of life you have later on, about whether you can go on that round-the-world cruise, about whether you can give some money to your kids if you want to, maybe help them buy a house, pay for a wedding. Whatever it is, pensions are about you helping yourself. They're not about people like me telling you off for being bad. And we've got to make, I think, pensions much more popular.